In the forests and fortified courts of medieval Romania, a ruler emerged whose reputation would echo across centuries. A prince accused of feasting among the impaled and consuming the flesh of his enemies. But beneath the legend of the emperor who ate his enemies lies a far more unsettling truth, not merely about brutality, but about power as theatre, fear as policy, and how societies learn to call horror order. This is not just the story of a man. It is the story of a world where cruelty could be rational, ritual could be governance, and terror could be stability. You are sitting at a wooden table. The air smells of roasted meat and smoke. Wax drips slowly from tall candles. Outside, someone is screaming, and the ruler at the head of the table, calm, composed, continues eating. Around him, bodies rise on sharpened stakes, not hidden, not accidental, displayed, and some witnesses would later claim something even stranger, that he dipped bread in their blood. How did a prince in 15th century Romania become known as the emperor who ate his enemies? Tonight, we don't chase the myth. We examine why it made sense to believe it. If you're drawn to stories where history feels stranger than fiction, slow, immersive, and deeply human, consider subscribing. This channel explores the moments where power and psychology collide. Now, let's step into the world that made this possible. It's the winter of 1460 in Wallachia, a principality in what is now Romania. You're standing inside a fortified court near Târgoviște. The air is sharp, cold enough to sting your lungs. Torches crackle against stone walls blackened by soot. The floor beneath you is packed earth, damp from melted snow tracked in by boots. Nobles, boyars, stand rigidly along the walls, fur-lined cloaks, eyes lowered. At the center, a long wooden table. At its head sits Vlad III, later known as Vlad the Impaler. Dark hair, controlled posture. Watching everything. He does not raise his voice. Outside the courtyard walls, wooden stakes pierce the grey sky. Some hold thieves, some traitors, some captured enemies. You can smell sap from freshly cut wood, and something else. The message is unmistakable. Order has returned. But here's what most people miss. This is not chaos. This is choreography. Wallachia in the mid-1400s was not a stable kingdom. It was a borderland, squeezed between the expanding Ottoman Empire to the south and the Kingdom of Hungary to the north. Empires did not politely negotiate here. They absorbed. In 1453, only 7 years earlier, Mehmed II captured Constantinople. That event alone reshaped Europe's psychological map. The Ottomans were advancing. Wallachia was small. And small states on imperial borders survive in only a few ways. Pay tribute, submit, or become terrifying. Vlad chose the third, but here's where it gets complicated. He had learned fear from the inside. As a boy, Vlad and his younger brother were taken as political hostages to the Ottoman court. This was not unusual. It was insurance. Their father, Vlad II Dracula, had joined the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order sworn to resist Ottoman expansion. The word Dracula meant dragon, though later it would also mean devil. Already, symbolism was attaching itself to the family. In the Ottoman court, young Vlad would have witnessed discipline, hierarchy, and spectacular punishment. Public executions were not rare in the 15th century. Anywhere. Power was visible. Power was staged. And here is the recurring truth we'll return to. Power doesn't whisper. It performs. Now we approach the most infamous claim. in pamphlets printed in German cities in the 1460s. Among the earliest examples of mass political propaganda made possible by the new printing press, Vlad was accused of monstrous acts. One story claimed he dined among impaled victims. Another claimed he dipped bread in their blood. Some later versions escalated into outright cannibalism. Historians debate these accounts. No reliable court record confirms literal cannibalism. Many scholars argue these pamphlets were political warfare, likely encouraged by Saxon merchants in Transylvania who had economic disputes with Vlad. Printing was new, shock sold, and Vlad's enemies understood something modern tabloids still understand. If you can make a ruler seem inhuman, you weaken him. But here's the unsettling part. The stories spread because they felt believable. Why? Because impalement, documented and widely attested, was already extreme enough. Impalement was not invented by Vlad. It had been used in parts of the Middle East and Eastern Europe before his reign. But under Vlad, records suggest it became systematic. Thousands may have been executed this way during his campaigns, particularly during conflicts with Ottoman forces in 1462. Numbers vary dramatically. Some sources claim tens of thousands. Modern historians caution that medieval chroniclers often exaggerated, but even conservative estimates describe large-scale use. Why choose something so visibly horrific? Because in a fragmented feudal society, where local nobles constantly shifted loyalties, fear traveled faster than paperwork. Wallachia lacked a strong bureaucracy. It lacked deep institutional infrastructure. So Vlad built compliance through spectacle. Like a modern corporation facing internal sabotage, might stage a very public firing to send a message. Except here, the stakes were literal, and everyone understood the message. This is the critical question. To modern viewers, the cruelty seems irrational, but in the 15th century, disease was common, warfare was constant, betrayal among elites was routine, borders shifted yearly, mercy could look like weakness. Weakness could invite invasion. Vlad's brutality created predictability. Travelers recorded a story, possibly apocryphal, that a golden cup was placed by a well in Târgoviște, and no one dared steal it. Whether true or not, the story reveals something powerful. People associated his rule with absolute order. Fear can stabilize, at least temporarily. A prince raised between empires, a frontier state under pressure, a ruler who turned punishment into theater, pamphlets that painted him as a cannibal, fact and fiction merging in real time, and behind it all, a society deciding that terror might be preferable to collapse. But soon, Vlad would attempt something even more audacious. He would challenge the Ottoman Empire itself, and in doing so, he would create a spectacle so vast that even a conquering sultan would hesitate. A forest, 20,000 stakes, and a message carved into the landscape. A boy stands in a foreign palace. Silk banners ripple overhead. Guards in polished armor watch without blinking. He is not chained, but he is not free. And he is learning something far more dangerous than obedience. It's around 1442. You are in Edirne, then a capital of the expanding Ottoman Empire. The air smells faintly of rosewater and oil lamps. Marble floors cool your bare feet. Courtiers move in measured silence. Every gesture feels rehearsed. At the far end of a vast hall, under layered textiles embroidered with gold thread, sits authority itself. The future conqueror of Constantinople, Mehmed II, is still young, but the system around him is already immense. And somewhere among the foreign hostages stands a Wallachian boy, Vlad, not yet the Impaler, not yet a legend, just a political guarantee. His father, Vlad II Dracula, had wavered between loyalty to Hungary and submission to the Ottomans. That kind of ambiguity required insurance, so the sons were taken, not brutalized, educated, watched, measured. Here's what most people miss. Hostage-taking in the 15th century wasn't simply coercion, it was integration. To modern ears, the word hostage suggests panic and ransom videos. But in medieval diplomacy, elite hostages often lived inside royal courts, received training, language instruction, even military education. They learned the empire from the inside. The Ottomans in particular had refined this system. The Devshirme, the levy of Christian boys for state service, had already begun shaping a new bureaucratic military class. The empire absorbed talent. It converted potential enemies into administrators. Vlad grew up watching this machinery operate. He observed structured hierarchy, ritualized discipline, public punishment, strategic mercy. He would later replicate some of these elements in Wallachia, but with a harsher edge. And here's where it gets complicated. Living inside the Ottoman court did not make him Ottoman. It sharpened his awareness of scale. Imagine being a teenage prince whose homeland is small, divided, and perpetually threatened. Then imagine seeing an empire capable of mobilizing tens of thousands of troops, engineers, bureaucrats, tax collectors. You understand something immediately. Your homeland cannot compete through numbers. It must compete through reputation. This is where psychology enters. Fear is scalable. Fear travels. Fear doesn't require infrastructure. And remember our line, power doesn't whisper, it performs. In Edirne, Vlad watched power perform daily, in ceremony, in architecture, in execution. But he also witnessed something subtler, efficiency. The Ottoman state collected taxes with regularity. It rotated governors. It documented. Wallachia had none of that stability, and instability breeds paranoia. In 1447, while Vlad was still in Ottoman custody, his father, Vlad II Dracula, was assassinated by rival boyars with Hungarian backing. Shortly after, Vlad's older brother Mircea was reportedly buried alive. Sources differ on the exact details. Medieval chronicles are often partisan. But what is consistent is this. Vlad lost his father, he lost his brother, he lost his throne, and he learned that Wallachian nobles, the boyars, could be just as dangerous as any foreign army. Now picture this. You are a teenage prince in a foreign empire. Your father is dead. Your homeland has replaced you. The message is clear. If you return, you will return to betrayal. The frontier problem. Wallachia sat between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Its rulers were often installed, removed, restored, replaced, sometimes within a single year. In Ottoman custody, Vlad likely learned Turkish language, military tactics, court etiquette, Islamic governance structures. Some historians argue he even developed a complex admiration for Ottoman organization while rejecting Ottoman rule itself. This duality matters. He was not an ignorant barbarian reacting blindly. He was educated in imperial logic. He understood spectacle at scale, which raises a deeper question. When he later impaled thousands, was it uncontrolled rage or calculated messaging? Historians debate motive, but the timing of his most dramatic acts often following rebellion or invasion, suggest strategy. And here's the unsettling part. Systems teach even those who hate them. The return to Wallachia. In 1456, amid regional turmoil, Vlad seized the Wallachian throne for what would become his most significant reign. The Ottoman Empire was expanding, Hungary was wary, the boyars were unreliable, the treasury was thin, and Vlad had a choice: rule cautiously and risk being overthrown, or rule decisively and reshape fear itself. He chose decisively. Why did this make sense? Because in a frontier principality, loyalty was fluid, borders were porous, external invasion was constant, internal elites plotted. A ruler who hesitated could vanish. Vlad's childhood taught him something, brutal but logical. Empires survive through systems. Small states survive through signal. If Wallachia could not match Ottoman strength, it could manufacture unpredictability. And unpredictability unsettles even empires. Mini recap: a hostage prince in Edirne, a father assassinated, a brother killed, a throne destabilized, an empire observed from the inside. This was not the origin of a monster. It was the education of a strategist shaped by fear. Between 1448 and 1456, Vlad himself would briefly take the throne, lose it, and fight to regain it. There was no stable succession law strong enough to prevent elite manipulation. In a system like this, cruelty can become policy, not because leaders enjoy it, but because uncertainty demands visible dominance. Think of a modern startup caught between two tech giants. If it can't outspend them or outproduce them, it might cultivate a bold, disruptive identity. Something loud enough to command attention. Vlad's disruption would not be marketing, it would be terror. Education in Empire cliffhanger ending. When Vlad finally consolidated power, he didn't begin with foreign enemies. He began at home. The boyars who had betrayed his father, the elites who had buried his brother. And what he did to them would redefine rule in Wallachia, not as negotiation, but as spectacle. A banquet is announced. The nobles arrive in fur and velvet. Wine is poured. Music drifts softly through the hall. By nightfall, many of them will be dead, and Wallachia will never operate the same way again. You are there. Easter at Targovište. It's likely 1459. The location: Targovište, the princely seat of Wallachia. SFX, distant church bells. The air smells of incense from Easter liturgy. Beeswax candles flicker inside the Orthodox cathedral. Outside, the early spring mud clings to boots and hems. You stand among the boyars, Wallachia's landed aristocracy, heavy cloaks, gold-threaded cuffs, rings set with cloudy stones. They are not peasants, they are power. At the head of the hall sits Vlad the Impaler, now firmly prince. His posture is straight, his expression unreadable. Food is served, wine is poured, conversation flows, and then the doors close. Guards move into position. Some sources, especially later German pamphlets, describe what followed as a massacre. Others suggest a calculated purge. What most accounts agree on is this: a large number of boyars were arrested, older ones executed, younger ones forced into labor to build fortifications, including work at Pernari Castle. The aristocracy of Wallachia had just been reshaped. And here's what most people miss. This was not random cruelty. It was institutional restructuring. Context expansion. The boyar problem. To understand this moment, we have to understand how Wallachia actually functioned. Unlike centralized kingdoms, Wallachia's ruler depended heavily on powerful regional nobles, boyars, who controlled land, peasants, and private armed retainers. They could switch allegiance to Hungary, negotiate privately with the Ottomans, back rival claimants to the throne. In fact, they often did. Between 1430 and 1456, Wallachia experienced repeated leadership changes. Stability was rare. For Vlad, the lesson was personal. Boyars had conspired against his father. If he did nothing, history could repeat itself. And here's where it gets complicated. Eliminating elites risks destabilizing the very structure you rule. But leaving them intact risked your own death. The logic of the purge. Historians debate the exact scale of the Easter Purge. The dramatic German accounts emphasize cruelty. Romanian chronicles tend to frame it as justice against traitors. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but the strategic logic is clear. Remove entrenched aristocrats. Redistribute land to loyal followers. Centralize authority around the prince. This was state building through fear. Think of a modern corporation after a scandal. A new CEO steps in. Executives are fired publicly. The board is reshuffled. The message isn't just punishment, it's dominance. Vlad was sending a message to every regional power broker. The era of negotiated rule is over. And remember, power doesn't whisper, it performs. Daily life in the borderland. Now step outside the castle walls. You are a peasant in a wooden village along the Argeș River. Smoke rises from low thatched roofs. Pigs root in muddy yards. The scent of cabbage stew drifts through cold air. Your life is seasonal. Planting, harvesting, tax collection, survival. You fear bandits. You fear foreign raids. You fear famine. You also fear your local lord. When Vlad tightened punishments for theft, dishonesty, disobedience, it was terrifying, but it also created predictability. One chronicler recounts the story of a merchant who left a purse of gold unattended and found it untouched the next day. We cannot confirm every anecdote, but such stories persisted for a reason. Order had become visible, and visible order can feel safer than negotiated corruption. The building projects. The labor imposed on surviving boyars and their families reportedly contributed to strengthening Poinari Castle, perched high above the Argeș River valley. B-roll suggestion. Mountain ruins, steep stone steps, wind over cliffs. Climb the 1,400 stone steps today, and you feel the isolation. Strategically, it was brilliant. Hard to access, easy to defend, visually imposing. In a land vulnerable to invasion, fortification was survival. And forced labor sent a second message. Status no longer protected you. Loyalty did. But here's where it gets complicated. Centralization creates enemies. The Saxon merchants of Transylvania, economically powerful communities north of Wallachia, began clashing with Vlad over trade privileges. He restricted their rights. He punished those who defied his authority. Some were executed, some towns were attacked, and soon the printing presses of German cities would begin producing something new: narrative warfare. By the early 1460s, pamphlets circulated across Central Europe describing Vlad as monstrous. These texts, among the earliest examples of printed political propaganda, depicted impalements in vivid detail. Some woodcuts show forests of stakes. Others show exaggerated cruelty. They were effective. Europe was fascinated. Printing was new technology. Disruptive, fast, scalable. Shock stories traveled farther than trade disputes. And once a ruler is branded a monster, nuance rarely survives. Here's what most people miss. The cannibalism stories likely emerged from this environment, where exaggeration was profitable and politically useful. Why did it make sense? From Vlad's perspective, eliminate unreliable elites, strengthen fortifications, intimidate internal dissent, signal strength to external enemies. From the boyar's perspective, he was unpredictable, dangerous, tyrannical. From peasants' perspective, he may have been harsh, but thieves disappeared. From Saxon merchants' perspective, he was a threat to economic autonomy. History rarely offers a single angle. It offers intersecting fears. An Easter banquet turned purge. Boyars removed, castles fortified, merchants angered, pamphlets printed. Wallachia was becoming more centralized, and Vlad's reputation was becoming more extreme. But the true test was not internal, it was imperial. In 1462, the Ottoman Empire would march north, and Vlad would respond not with negotiation, but with a landscape transformed into a message. A message so vast that even a conquering sultan would pause. Dawn breaks over a field, mist lifts slowly from the ground. The birds are silent, then the shapes emerge. Hundreds, thousands, wooden stakes rising from the earth, each one carrying a body. An army has arrived to witness it, and this is not a battlefield. It is a message. You are there, the forest outside Târgoviște. It is June 1462. You are riding south with the army of Mehmed II, the Sultan who captured Constantinople less than a decade earlier. The Ottoman force is vast, perhaps 60,000 or more, according to some estimates. Exact numbers are debated. The summer air is thick. Dust clings to armor and skin. Horses snort under heavy tack. You expect resistance, you expect ambush. What you do not expect is this. As the army approaches Târgoviște, the capital of Wallachia, the smell hits first. Not fresh death, decay. Then, through the thinning trees, you see them. A forest of stakes. Chroniclers describe thousands of impaled bodies, possibly 20,000, though historians caution that medieval numbers are often inflated. Still, even if the number were half that, or less, the scale would have been staggering. The stakes are arranged deliberately. Different heights, different distances, a grotesque symmetry. This is not chaos, it is design. And at the center of it all, the absent architect, Vlad the Impaler. To understand this moment, we need the political backdrop. By 1461, Vlad had stopped paying tribute to the Ottoman Empire. He had executed Ottoman envoys, according to some sources, even nailing their turbans to their heads when they refused to remove them in his presence. Historians debate the literal accuracy of this story, but its symbolism is clear. Submission was over. In early 1462, Vlad launched raids south of the Danube, attacking Ottoman garrisons in Bulgaria. This was a gamble. Wallachia was small. The Ottoman response was inevitable. So when Mehmed II marched north that summer, he came prepared to crush rebellion. Instead, he found theatre, terror as strategy. The so-called Forest of the Impaled was psychological warfare, not random, not impulsive, strategic. Vlad understood he could not defeat the Ottomans in open battle for long, but he could destabilize morale. He could unsettle command. He could introduce doubt. Ottoman chroniclers themselves record Mehmed's shock at the display, though they do not dwell on fear. One account suggests the Sultan admired the ruthlessness, even as he condemned it. Whether admiration or horror, the effect was real. The army advanced, but the momentum had shifted. And here's what most people miss. The audience was not only the Ottomans, it was everyone. Boyars, peasants, Hungary, Transylvania. The message was simple. If this is what I do to invaders, imagine betrayal. But here's where it gets complicated. Terror works best in short bursts. Sustained terror requires resources, manpower, and loyalty. Vlad was burning bridges as fast as he was building reputation. During this campaign, he also conducted what historians call the Night Attack in June 1462, a daring raid on the Ottoman camp, attempting to assassinate Mehmed II directly. Under cover of darkness, Wallachian forces penetrated deep into the Ottoman encampment. Confusion, fire, shouting in multiple languages. The assassination attempt failed, but it intensified Vlad's image. Unpredictable, relentless, audacious. And yet, even boldness has limits. The system beneath the spectacle. What allowed this to happen was not just cruelty, it was organization. Impalement on this scale required timber labor coordination time. This suggests administrative control. It wasn't one man acting alone in rage. It was a functioning system carrying out orders. Which brings us back to a central question. Why would people participate? Because survival aligned with obedience. In frontier societies, neutrality is fragile. If Vlad fell, collaborators with him would be punished by the Ottomans. If the Ottomans fell back, those who resisted Vlad would face his retribution. So, many complied. Fear narrowed choices. Consider how modern states, or even corporations, stage strength during crisis. A company facing collapse may announce sweeping layoffs, bold restructurings, aggressive public messaging. Not because it enjoys disruption, but because visible action signals control. Vlad's restructuring was simply medieval in method, brutal, public, unmistakable. He was branding Wallachia as ungovernable by outsiders. And in the short term, it worked. Mehmed II did not permanently occupy Wallachia that year. Instead, he installed Vlad's brother, Radu, as a rival claimant. Divide and destabilize. The empire adjusted. From Vlad's perspective, he needed to deter invasion without matching Ottoman manpower. From Mehmed's perspective, he needed to prevent rebellion from inspiring other vassals. From Wallachian peasants' perspective, if terror kept foreign armies away, it might mean survival. Cruelty, in this context, was framed as defense, not chaos, not madness, defense. And when survival feels existential, moral boundaries shift. Tribute stopped, raids launched, an Ottoman army marches. A forest of impaled bodies greets it. The spectacle travels across Europe. Pamphlets amplify it. The line between strategy and monstrosity blurs, and Vlad's legend hardens. But terror has a cost. While Vlad was confronting an empire, alliances inside Wallachia were fracturing. His own brother stood aligned with the Ottomans. The boyars watched carefully, and soon the performer of power would discover something unsettling. Spectacle can protect a throne, but it can also isolate it. A sheet of paper slides off a wooden press, ink still wet. Woodcut illustrations stark and crude. A crowned figure dines calmly, while bodies twist on stakes around him. Beneath the image, a claim. He eats among the dead. He drinks their blood. And suddenly, a regional war becomes a European horror story. It's the mid-1460s. You're inside a workshop in Nuremberg, one of the free imperial cities of the Holy Roman Empire. The room smells of oil, ink, and damp paper pulp. A heavy wooden press creaks rhythmically. Apprentices hang fresh sheets to dry along lines strung overhead. On the page before you is a story about a Wallachian prince, Vlad the Impaler. The pamphlet describes impalements in grotesque detail, children boiled alive, a common medieval exaggeration trope, bread dipped in blood. Feasts among the dying historians strongly question the literal accuracy of many of these claims. But accuracy isn't the point. Circulation is. The printing press, refined by Johannes Gutenberg just a decade earlier, has changed Europe. Stories can now travel far beyond the battlefield. And this one spreads quickly. Context expansion. Why these pamphlets appeared by the early 1460s, Vlad had clashed not only with the Ottomans, but also with Saxon merchants in Transylvania. These communities, many of them German-speaking, controlled trade routes and urban economies north of Wallachia. Vlad imposed restrictions. He punished defiance. He attacked some Saxon settlements. From their perspective, he was a tyrant threatening commercial autonomy. And merchants had something new on their side: printing networks. The so-called Dracula pamphlets began appearing in German cities around 1463. They are among the earliest examples of mass-produced political propaganda in Europe. Some were prose narratives, some were illustrated woodcuts, all emphasized extreme cruelty. Here's what most people miss. The cannibalism motif appears primarily in these hostile German sources. It does not dominate Romanian chronicles in the same way. The cannibalism claim. Did Vlad literally eat his enemies? There is no reliable contemporary evidence confirming actual cannibalism. The most sensational accounts come from adversarial pamphlets. Some describe him dipping bread in blood. Others imply consumption of flesh. Modern historians overwhelmingly interpret these claims as symbolic exaggerations, meant to portray him as demonic rather than merely brutal. In medieval Christian Europe, cannibalism signified ultimate moral corruption. To accuse a ruler of it was to say, he is not just cruel, he is inhuman. And once someone is labeled inhuman, negotiation becomes impossible. But here's where it gets complicated. Even if the cannibalism claims were fabricated or exaggerated, Vlad's documented punishments were undeniably severe, which made the leap to cannibalism psychologically easy. When reality is already extreme, fiction doesn't have to stretch far, and audiences in 15th century Europe were primed for such tales. This was an era fascinated by marvels and monstrosities, giants at the edge of maps, men with dog heads in distant lands, apocalyptic sermons predicting the end times, a prince who dined among the impaled fit neatly into that mental landscape. Shock was believable. Myth versus political utility. The pamphlets served multiple purposes. They damaged Vlad's reputation among potential Christian allies. They justified opposition from Transylvanian elites. They entertained and horrified readers. And here's something striking. Even negative publicity amplified his name. Dracula became widely known in German-speaking Europe. The name itself came from his father's association with the Order of the Dragon. Dracul meaning dragon, later conflated with devil. Language blurred symbolism. Dragon, devil, blood. The myth assembled itself almost automatically. Think of how quickly rumors escalate in today's media ecosystem. A CEO faces scandal. Headlines amplify. Social media exaggerates. Memes distort. Within days, a complex situation becomes a caricature. In Vlad's case, The printing press functioned like early viral media. Woodcuts were the 15th century equivalent of shareable graphics. And once an image takes hold, a ruler calmly eating while surrounded by death, it becomes more powerful than any correction. Reputation becomes self-sustaining. Why did people believe it? Because it aligned with existing fears. Europe was anxious about Ottoman expansion. Borderlands felt unstable. Prophecies circulated. When a frontier prince was described as monstrous, it confirmed deeper suspicions. The edge of Christendom is dangerous, strange, corrupted. Belief often follows emotional readiness. The cannibalism stories didn't succeed because they were proven. They succeeded because they resonated. The psychological layer. But here's another dimension. Even if Vlad never consumed human flesh, he cultivated proximity to death. Dining near impaled bodies, if that occurred, would have been a deliberate display of emotional detachment. It signals something chilling. I am untouched by what terrifies you. And in leadership psychology, that detachment can be interpreted as strength, especially in violent eras. Again, we return to our line. Power doesn't whisper, it performs. Sometimes it performs through silence at a dinner table. Mini recap printing presses hum. Pamphlets circulate. Cannibalism enters the story. Fact merges with exaggeration. Reputation becomes weaponized. Vlad's brutality was real. The cannibalism likely was not, but the myth proved more durable than any court record. And yet, while Europe debated whether he was a monster, his political position was collapsing. Allies were thinning. His brother was gaining support. Hungary was reconsidering its stance. Soon, the man who terrified empires would find himself imprisoned, and the myth would grow even larger in his absence. A candle flickers in a stone monastery. Gold leaf glows faintly on an icon. A priest whispers a prayer for victory. Outside, soldiers sharpen stakes. Holiness and brutality share the same morning air, and no one here sees a contradiction. You are there, an Orthodox monastery in Wallachia. It's the early 1460s. You stand inside a monastery in the hills north of Târgoviște. Incense thickens the air. Chanting rises and falls in steady waves. Light filters through narrow windows, touching painted saints with pale gold. The walls are covered in frescoes. Stern-eyed martyrs, armored archangels, Christ enthroned in judgment. You kneel beside peasants and soldiers alike. They pray for protection, for harvest, for survival, and for their ruler, Vlad the Impaler. Here's what most people miss. In 15th century Wallachia, brutality did not automatically disqualify you from religious legitimacy. It could reinforce it. Wallachia was part of the Eastern Orthodox Christian world. Its rulers sponsored monasteries, donated land to churches, and positioned themselves as defenders of the faith. At the same time, just south of the Danube, the Ottoman Empire was expanding, an Islamic imperial power incorporating vast Christian populations but still perceived by many in Eastern Europe as a religious and political threat. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, anxiety deepened across Orthodox territories. The old Byzantine capital, spiritual heart of Eastern Christianity, had fallen to Mehmed II. Wallachia now stood even closer to the frontier. In this climate, resistance could be framed not just as political rebellion, but as sacred duty. Romanian chronicles, written later, often present Vlad as a defender of Christianity. He funded monasteries. He granted privileges to certain religious institutions. Some churches preserve inscriptions referencing his patronage. Historians caution that medieval rulers frequently used religious endowments to legitimize authority. This was not unique to Vlad, but perception mattered. If impalement punished traitors and invaders, it could be interpreted as protecting the Christian community. Violence, when framed as defense of the sacred, becomes morally reframed. And here's where it gets complicated. Faith can sanctify power, but power can also manipulate faith. In medieval Christian thought, both Eastern and Western, earthly punishment was often seen as a reflection of divine justice. Order mirrored heaven. Chaos reflected sin. Public execution in this worldview could be interpreted as restoring moral balance. When thieves, rebels, or invaders were punished visibly, it sent a message. Sin has consequence. In that framework, Vlad's severity might not appear monstrous, but righteous, especially to communities living under constant threat. Now picture this. A peasant whose village has been raided twice in a decade, whose crops have burned, whose relatives were taken in previous campaigns. If a ruler promises safety through severity, the bargain becomes tempting. Security over mercy. But here's where it becomes psychologically complex. The Ottomans themselves allowed religious pluralism within their empire. Orthodox Christians in Ottoman lands were often permitted to continue practicing their faith under the millet system. So the conflict was not purely religious, it was political, economic, strategic. Yet rhetoric leaned heavily on faith, because faith mobilizes emotion, faith binds communities, and in moments of crisis, identity hardens. Vlad positioned himself as a bulwark, not just of territory, but of belief. Even executions carried ritual elements. Public punishments were staged, crowds gathered, authority was displayed. In medieval Europe, Christian and Muslim alike, sovereignty was performative. Ceremony mattered, architecture mattered, processions mattered, and punishment, when public, became part of that choreography. We return again. Power doesn't whisper, it performs. In Wallachia, performance blended religious symbolism and political fear. Icons inside churches, stakes outside city walls, both communicated order. Consider how modern leaders invoke moral language during crises. Political speeches often frame policy in terms of values, freedom, security, justice. Even corporate leaders adopt ethical vocabulary during public scandals, promising accountability, transparency, reform. The language of morality strengthens authority. In Vlad's era, that language was theological: defense of Christendom, punishment of sin, preservation of order. The methods were violent, but the narrative was moral, because the alternative felt worse. Ottoman dominance, internal betrayal, fragmented authority, religious uncertainty. In that atmosphere, a ruler who projected uncompromising resolve could appear stabilizing. We must resist the temptation to flatten the past into villains and victims alone. Vlad's rule inspired fear. It also inspired loyalty. Both can coexist, and often do. Monasteries lit by candles, icons gleaming in gold, a prince funding churches and impaling enemies, faith intertwined with force, violence reframed as protection, and a society that did not see contradiction where we might. But religious legitimacy could not shield Vlad from politics. Hungary was watching, Transylvanian elites were lobbying, and soon the defender of Wallachia would be arrested, not by the Ottomans, but by a fellow Christian king. The performance of terror had won battles. Now it would face diplomacy. A cell door closes, iron against stone. The man who once arranged forests of stakes now stares at damp walls. Outside, Europe debates whether he is hero or monster. Inside he waits. It is late 1462. You are no longer in Wallachia. You are in the Kingdom of Hungary. The air is colder here, thicker stone, narrow windows. Word has spread that Vlad the Impaler, who defied the Ottoman Empire, has been taken into custody, not captured in battle, not executed by Mehmed II, arrested by Matthias Corvinus, the Christian king who had once seemed a potential ally. The cell smells of wet mortar and unwashed wool. Light enters in a narrow blade. And here's what most people miss. The fall of Vlad was not caused by Ottoman victory alone. It was political isolation. After the dramatic campaign of 1462, including the night attack and the infamous forest of impaled bodies near Târgoviște, Vlad retreated north, seeking support. He had positioned himself as a defender of Christendom. But Christian Europe was complicated. Hungary had its own calculations. Matthias Corvinus faced financial strain, diplomatic pressures, and internal politics. Supporting Vlad openly against the Ottomans meant prolonged conflict, expensive and uncertain. Then something decisive happened. Letters allegedly written by Vlad were presented, suggesting he was willing to negotiate secretly with the Ottomans. Historians debate the authenticity of these letters. Many scholars suspect forgery, possibly crafted to justify his arrest. But authenticity mattered less than utility. The result? Vlad was detained. But here's where it gets complicated. Was he imprisoned harshly, or held in a kind of political limbo? Sources differ. Some later accounts claim he was confined in Visegrad under relatively comfortable conditions. Others suggest stricter imprisonment. The exact conditions remain debated. What is clear is this. From roughly 1462 to 1475, Vlad was removed from power. Wallachia was ruled by his brother Radu, who was aligned with the Ottomans. The performer of terror was no longer performing, and without performance, reputation mutates. While Vlad sat in custody, German pamphlets continued circulating. Woodcuts grew more elaborate, stories grew darker. Distance makes exaggeration easier. When a figure is no longer present to contradict the narrative, myth accelerates. Now imagine the psychology of Europe at this moment. The Ottomans are expanding. Constantinople has fallen. Frontier wars are ongoing. A ruler who both resisted and terrified becomes a symbolic canvas. To some, he was a martyr of resistance. To others, proof that the borderlands bred monsters. His absence made him larger. Think about what happens when a controversial leader disappears from public view. Rumors fill the vacuum. Speculation multiplies. Media ecosystems amplify extremes. In our time, it might be social media threads, leaked memos, viral headlines. In the 15th century, it was pamphlets and oral transmission. But the dynamic is the same. Silence invites projection, and projection reshapes memory. Meanwhile, Wallachia did not collapse. It adapted. Radu, often called Radu the Handsome, in later accounts, ruled as an Ottoman-aligned prince. Tribute resumed. Stability of a kind returned. From the Ottoman perspective, this was success. From Hungary's perspective, containing Vlad removed a volatile actor. From Wallachian elite's perspective, the extreme centralization had paused, which raises an unsettling truth. Systems rarely depend on one personality alone. Even dramatic rulers can be replaced. For Matthias Corvinus, detaining Vlad avoided an immediate costly war. For Ottoman leadership, installing a compliant ruler maintained influence without prolonged occupation. For Wallachian boyars, a less severe prince may have felt safer. Vlad's strategy of spectacular terror had bought time, but it had not built durable alliances. Fear can secure obedience. It does not guarantee loyalty. Mini recap Ottoman campaign. Forest of Stakes. Night attack. Retreat north. Arrest by Hungary. Years in confinement. The man who weaponized fear now lives inside uncertainty, and Europe keeps printing his image, increasingly monstrous. After more than a decade away from the throne, Vlad would return, briefly. In 1476, he would reclaim Wallachia one last time. But the world had changed. Allies were fewer, enemies were stronger, and this final chapter would be short and violent. A marketplace at dawn. Vendors arrange bread and onions on wooden tables. A purse of coins sits unattended near a well. No one touches it, not because they are virtuous, because they are afraid. It is during Vlad's main reign, sometime between 1456 and 1462, before imprisonment. You stand in the central square of Târgoviște. The air smells of livestock and wet timber. Wooden stalls creak. Church bells echo over low rooftops. Peasants move cautiously but efficiently. A merchant counts coins in plain sight. No guards hover nearby. The story, recorded in later chronicles, claims that a golden cup once sat by a public well here and was never stolen. Historians debate whether this anecdote is literal or symbolic, but the message behind it is clear. Under Vlad the Impaler, theft carried consequences so severe that petty crime diminished. Order was visible. And here's what most people miss. For many ordinary people, predictability can feel like mercy, even when it comes wrapped in fear. When Vlad seized power in 1456, Wallachia was fragmented. Boyars controlled regional estates. Trade routes were vulnerable. External powers interfered constantly. To centralize authority, Vlad reportedly replaced disloyal nobles with trusted retainers, enforced strict punishment for theft and corruption, standardized certain administrative practices. Precise bureaucratic details are sparse. Medieval Wallachian records are limited, but patterns suggest intentional consolidation. He understood something fundamental. If terror is random, it creates chaos. If terror is predictable, it creates structure. And here's where it gets complicated. The line between justice and cruelty narrows when punishment is absolute. Law as spectacle public executions were not private affairs. They were events. Crowds gathered. Children watched. Priests prayed. Punishment became civic theatre. The impalement stake was not hidden behind walls. It was placed along roads, at city entrances, near trade routes. Travelers carried stories outward. In a land without mass literacy, visual memory mattered. You did not need to read a decree. You saw it. Power doesn't whisper, it performs. And in performing punishment, Vlad constructed a brand of rule. But here's where the structure begins to strain. Severity can deter crime. It can also suppress dissent temporarily. But it does not eliminate resentment. Merchants in Transylvania, particularly in Saxon cities like Brasov, resented Vlad's restrictions on their trading privileges. He sought to control economic flows. They sought autonomy. Conflict followed. Some sources describe him burning villages allied with hostile merchants. Others emphasize retaliatory violence. As always, accounts differ in detail. What remains consistent is tension. Trade in the 15th century was lifeblood. Salt, grain, livestock, cloth. These goods moved across the Carpathians. By exerting control over routes and tolls, Vlad increased princely revenue. But tighter control also angered entrenched interests. In modern terms, imagine a government suddenly imposing strict regulations on powerful corporations. The corporations respond with media campaigns, lobbying, pressure. In Vlad's era, that media campaign became pamphlets and diplomatic complaints. Economic conflict amplified reputational warfare. And fear, while stabilizing internally, made external partnerships fragile. From a peasant's perspective, reduced theft meant safer markets. From a merchant's perspective, unpredictable punishments threatened commerce. From a noble's perspective, centralization threatened privilege. From Vlad's perspective, fragmentation meant vulnerability. Every group acted rationally within its interests. That's the uncomfortable truth. History is rarely madness alone. It is intersecting incentives. We're halfway through this journey. If you've stayed with the story this far, consider sharing in the comments. Do you see Vlad primarily as a strategist shaped by circumstance, or as a ruler who crossed moral lines even by medieval standards? Your perspective matters, especially in stories where myth and reality blur. And if you're finding this deep dive meaningful, this is the perfect moment to like the video. It helps long-form history like this reach others who appreciate nuance over noise. Now, back to Wallachia. After his imprisonment in Hungary and eventual release, likely around 1475, under shifting political pressures, Vlad returned briefly to power in 1476. But the landscape had changed. The Ottomans remained dominant. Alliances were thinner. Trust was scarce. A system built heavily on personal authority struggles when that authority is interrupted. Fear is powerful. It is not easily inherited. Markets functioning under threat. A golden cup left untouched. Public punishment as policy. Economic conflicts intensifying. Alliances fraying. Vlad's Wallachia was orderly, but brittle. And brittleness under pressure often cracks. In 1476, Vlad would reclaim the throne one final time. It would last only weeks, perhaps months. And then, somewhere in the cold landscape of late medieval warfare, the performer of terror would fall. His body would disappear into uncertainty. But his story, it was just beginning. A battlefield at dusk. Smoke drifts low across frozen ground. Armor lies scattered in mud. A severed banner flaps weakly in the wind. Somewhere in the chaos, a prince falls. No chronicler agrees exactly how, but everyone agrees on this. The legend does not die with him. You are there, Wallachia, winter, 1476. It is late 1476. You are moving with a small, tense army through the cold plains of Wallachia. The air cuts like glass. Boots sink into half-frozen earth. Horses breathe steam. At the center of this fragile campaign stands Vlad the Impaler, returned from years of imprisonment in Hungary. The political map has shifted again. The Ottoman Empire remains powerful. Hungary is recalibrating alliances. Wallachia is exhausted by decades of instability. Yet Vlad has reclaimed the throne, likely with Hungarian backing, for what will be his third and final reign. It will not last. By the mid-1470s, regional politics had shifted. Hungary, under Matthias Corvinus, had renewed its confrontation with Ottoman expansion. Supporting Vlad again became strategically useful. In November 1476, Vlad appears to have regained control of Wallachia, but the hold was tenuous. The Ottomans and rival Wallachian factions responded quickly. Within weeks, perhaps by December, Vlad was dead. The precise circumstances are debated. Some accounts suggest he was killed in battle against Ottoman-aligned forces. Others claim he was mistakenly killed by his own troops in the confusion of combat. The fog of medieval warfare obscures certainty, but here's where it gets complicated. What happened to his body is equally uncertain. Some sources claim his head was sent to Constantinople as proof of death, a common practice in medieval warfare. If true, it would have been presented to Mehmed II. Other traditions place his burial at the monastery of Snagov, though archaeological evidence remains inconclusive. Historians debate, records are fragmentary. What remains clear is this: his physical presence ended abruptly, but his narrative did not. After Vlad's death, Wallachia continued under rulers more closely aligned with Ottoman interests. Tribute payments resumed as standard practice. Stability, of a sort, returned, though always conditional. And here's the uncomfortable truth: Wallachia survived, not through permanent defiance, but through negotiation and accommodation. Vlad's extreme resistance did not permanently free the principality. It bought moments that mattered symbolically, but not structurally. For Hungary, supporting Vlad temporarily counterbalanced Ottoman pressure. For the Ottomans, removing him eliminated an unpredictable insurgent. For Wallachian elites, a less volatile ruler reduced personal risk. From a systems perspective, Vlad's model was difficult to sustain. Fear centered on one personality dissolves when that personality disappears. Institutions endure longer than individuals. Consider leaders today who build authority primarily around personal charisma and dramatic gestures. While they dominate headlines, their influence feels absolute. But when they exit through resignation, defeat, or scandal, the system often reabsorbs the shock. Structures persist, markets continue, institutions adapt. The spectacle fades faster than expected. Vlad's rule functioned similarly. Power performed loudly, but it was not deeply institutionalized. Now something subtle happens. With Vlad gone, the immediacy of his policies fades, but the stories intensify. German pamphlets continue circulating. Eastern European chronicles reinterpret his reign. Oral traditions begin reshaping memory. He becomes tyrant, defender, monster, martyr, all at once. This is the alchemy of history. Death simplifies complexity, and when records are sparse, imagination fills gaps. Why does his story survive so vividly? Because it operates at psychological extremes. Fear, blood, faith, empire, betrayal. These themes do not age easily. They migrate, they adapt, they wait. And centuries later, a writer in Victorian England will discover the name Dracula in a library and reshape it entirely. But we're not there yet. First, we need to understand how myth manufactures itself. A final return, a brief reign, a violent death, a missing body. Wallachia continues. The man disappears. The legend expands. Because in the decades after his death, Europe would keep printing his image. And 3 centuries later, in a quiet study far from the Carpathians, a novelist would find that name, Dracula, and transform a frontier prince into something immortal. A candle burns low in a study. A writer flips through an old book of foreign names. His finger pauses. Dracula. It sounds ancient, dangerous. He underlines it. Centuries collapse in that moment. You are there. A study in 1890s London. It is the early 1890s. You stand inside a modest study in London. Coal smoke drifts faintly through the window. Papers are stacked in uneven piles. A notebook lies open on a wooden desk. The writer, Bram Stoker, is researching Eastern European folklore for a new Gothic novel. He has encountered a reference to a Wallachian ruler named Dracula. The word catches his attention. He copies it into his notes. He likely finds the name in historical sources discussing Vlad the Impaler, though Stoker's exact research trail is still debated by scholars. And here's what most people miss. Stoker did not invent the name, but he transformed its meaning forever. By the late 19th century, Europe was steeped in fascination with the exotic East. Transylvania, mountainous, distant, wrapped in mist, fit perfectly into Victorian Gothic imagination. Stoker published Dracula in 1897. His Count Dracula is a vampire, undead, aristocratic, predatory. There is little direct historical overlap between the fictional Count and the 15th century Wallachian prince beyond the name, and a few references to a warlike past. Yet the association stuck. Why? Because Vlad's existing legend already contained the right ingredients. Blood, impalement, frontier violence. A name linked to dragon and devil. The myth required only a supernatural layer. But here's where it becomes culturally profound. Stoker's novel exploded in popularity. The vampire archetype became global. Stage plays followed. Silent films emerged. Then cinema icons. Each adaptation further blurred the line between historical ruler and fictional creature. The real Vlad, a 15th century prince navigating imperial politics, became overshadowed by a caped immortal. History was absorbed by storytelling. Dracula derives from his father's association with the order of the dragon. In Romanian, Dracula means son of Dracul, son of the dragon. But in later vernacular, Dracul also connoted devil. Language evolves, meaning shifts. Stoker recognized the theatrical quality of the name, and in literature, sound often outweighs accuracy. The transformation was complete. A border prince became a vampire count. A political narrative became supernatural myth. Think of how modern pop culture reinterprets historical figures. Complex leaders are reduced to archetypes: rebel, villain, genius, monster. Streaming platforms, films, novels. They distill nuance into recognizable brands. Once a character becomes iconic, the original context fades. The same happened to Vlad. The printing press made him infamous. Victorian fiction made him immortal. And 20th century cinema globalized him. Because it satisfied psychological hunger. Vampires embody fear of invasion, fear of contagion, fear of aristocratic exploitation, fear of death itself. These anxieties were alive in Victorian Britain, an empire confronting its own vulnerabilities. Dracula became a vessel for cultural unease. The historical Vlad provided a spine of plausibility. Blood and stakes were already there. Fiction only added fangs. What fades in this transformation? The Ottoman frontier, the boyars, the economic disputes with Saxon merchants, the political imprisonment, the fragile alliances. What remains? A castle on a cliff, a shadow in moonlight, a thirst for blood. History simplifies into symbol, and symbols travel farther than archives. 15th century pamphlets sensationalize brutality. 19th century fiction reimagines the name. Cinema globalizes the image. Vlad the ruler dissolves. Dracula, the vampire, rises. The man who may never have eaten his enemies becomes forever associated with consuming blood. But before we leave the historical Vlad behind, we must return to the core question. Beyond the myth, beyond the vampire, did he truly cross boundaries even by medieval standards? And how extreme was he compared to his contemporaries? Because understanding that difference between brutality common to the era and brutality uniquely amplified is where the real story lives. Stand on a cliff in the Carpathian Mountains. Wind tears across broken stone. Below you, a river cuts through forest like a scar. Long before capes and fangs, this landscape already held the legend. You are there, the ruins of Ponari, its present day. You've climbed the steep stone steps to the ruins of Ponari Castle. Your lungs burn. Wind presses against the cliffside. The Argesh River glints far below. These ruins are often called Vlad's real castle, though the association is based on historical tradition and partial documentation, rather than continuous records. Unlike Bran Castle, frequently marketed to tourists, Ponari's link to Vlad the Impaler is considered stronger by many historians. Here's what most people miss. The Dracula myth did not invent the landscape. It borrowed it. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in 1897, he had never visited Transylvania. His descriptions were assembled from travel literature, maps, and imagination. The fictional castle is not a documented historical structure. It is a Gothic composite, part Carpathian isolation, part Victorian fantasy. In contrast, the historical Vlad operated within specific documented locations. Târgoviște, capital; Poenari, fortification; the Danube frontier Transylvanian trade towns. These were not supernatural settings. They were strategic positions in a volatile border zone. And here's where it gets complicated. Tourism and national identity later blended them together. In modern Romania, Vlad's image has undergone rehabilitation, particularly during the 19th and 20th centuries. Amid rising nationalism, he was reframed less as a monster and more as a strong ruler who resisted Ottoman domination. Under Nicolae Ceausescu, national history emphasized figures who symbolized independence and strength. Vlad's resistance narrative fit neatly into that framework. Brutality was contextualized as necessary defense. The vampire myth was often treated as a Western distortion, which raises a powerful question. Who owns a historical figure? The culture that produced him, or the culture that popularized him? But here's where memory becomes political. When a nation reclaims a controversial ruler as a hero, it selectively emphasizes certain traits: defender of sovereignty, enforcer of order, patron of the church, and downplays others. This is not unique to Romania. Every country negotiates its past. Complex leaders are rarely remembered in full complexity. They are shaped to serve present needs. In Vlad's case, two powerful narratives emerged: Western Gothic villain, Eastern national defender, both incomplete. Think of how modern public figures are interpreted differently across political or cultural lines. One group sees reformer, another sees authoritarian, one sees patriot, another sees threat. The same speeches, the same actions, different lenses. History works the same way. The past does not change. Its framing does. Despite Romanian efforts to emphasize the historical ruler, the global imagination still leans toward the vampire. Why? Because supernatural myth travels more easily than geopolitical nuance. A vampire requires no footnotes. A 15th century tributary dispute does. The simplicity of blood-drinking immortality eclipses the complexity of border diplomacy. And yet, beneath the cape and fangs, the historical Vlad remains, a frontier prince navigating impossible choices. Now that we've separated fiction from geography, we must confront something deeper, even stripped of vampire myth. Was Vlad unusually brutal compared to his contemporaries? In 15th century Europe and the Ottoman world, public executions were common. Impalement, while not universal, was not unheard of. Mass violence during warfare was routine across regions. What distinguished Vlad was scale and theatricality. He amplified punishment into spectacle. He curated fear deliberately. That difference matters because it suggests intentional psychological governance, not random savagery. Mini recap Carpathian cliffs, ruined fortresses, Victorian fiction layered over medieval politics, national narratives reshaping memory. Dracula the vampire obscures Vlad the ruler, but once we peel back fiction, we confront a more unsettling truth. He was not a monster from folklore. He was a human leader operating within and pushing the limits of his time. So now we arrive at the heart of it. Stripped of myth, stripped of nationalist polish. Did Vlad cross boundaries even medieval rulers avoided? Or has exaggeration magnified him beyond proportion? To answer that, we have to step back and compare him to his world. Imagine walking toward a city gate. You expect guards, you expect banners. Instead, you see bodies arranged like architecture. No words are spoken, but you understand everything. It is the early 1460s. You are a merchant, approaching a Wallachian town. Dust clings to your boots. The wooden wheels of your cart creak under sacks of grain. Ahead, the city gates rise, rough timber reinforced with iron. And along the road, spaced deliberately, are stakes, some empty, some not. The smell of pine sap mixes with something sour. No herald reads a proclamation. No official stops you. The message is self-explanatory. You adjust your posture. You check your papers. You enter carefully. This is governance through environment. And here's what most people miss. Spectacle is infrastructure. To evaluate whether Vlad the Impaler was uniquely brutal, we must widen the lens. 15th century Europe and the Near East were not gentle places. In Western Europe, public executions were common. Torture was legally sanctioned in certain judicial contexts. Rebellions were often crushed with exemplary violence. In the expanding Ottoman Empire, severe punishment also functioned as deterrence. Rebellious governors or military opponents could face execution in highly visible ways. Mass casualties in warfare were tragically routine across regions. So what made Vlad stand out in the sources? Two elements: frequency and scale, attributed to impalement. The aesthetic arrangement, the deliberate staging. This was not just punishment, it was visual messaging. But here's where it gets complicated. Our understanding relies heavily on hostile German pamphlets and later chronicles. These sources emphasize extremity. They amplify numbers, they heighten horror. Yet even if we reduce the figures, even if we discount exaggeration, multiple independent accounts confirm systematic use of impalement. So we are left with nuance. He was not alone in brutality. but he leaned into theatrical brutality more than most rulers of comparable size and power, and that theatricality made him unforgettable. In political theory, authority rests on legitimacy. In fragile states, legitimacy is hard to maintain. Wallachia lacked a vast bureaucracy, a stable succession system, geographic insulation from empire, so Vlad compensated with performance. A stake-line road is not just punishment. It is a broadcast system. It tells peasants, steal, and this is you. It tells nobles, plot, and this is you. It tells invading armies, advance, and this is you. It tells allies, I am serious. Power doesn't whisper, it performs. And Vlad understood this intuitively. Spectacle operates on the nervous system. When fear is vivid and visual, it imprints deeply. You do not need repeated enforcement. Memory does the work. This reduces administrative burden. You do not require constant patrols if the landscape itself warns. In that sense, spectacle is efficient, brutal, but efficient. And in a small principality with limited resources, efficiency matters. Consider how modern governments stage large-scale military parades. Missiles roll through city, streets, jets fly overhead. The message is not immediate combat, it is deterrence. Or think of corporations that build towering headquarters, glass and steel monuments signaling permanence and strength. The architecture communicates before any press release does. Vlad's architecture was wood and flesh, but the principle was similar. Symbolic dominance reduces perceived vulnerability. It is tempting to judge the 15th century by modern standards. We should acknowledge moral discomfort. At the same time, we must avoid flattening context. Medieval societies accepted forms of punishment that modern societies reject. That does not make them uniformly monstrous. It makes them different. The key distinction is not whether violence existed. It did everywhere. The distinction is how consciously it was stylized. Vlad's genius, if we can call it that, was understanding the psychological multiplier effect of stylization. He curated fear because Wallachia was outmatched militarily, because betrayal was common, because invasion was cyclical, because memory travels faster than armies. Spectacle compressed authority into a single image, and images are durable. Even now, centuries later, we remember the forest of stakes more vividly than the trade treaties, but spectacle has a cost. It isolates, it polarizes, it reduces space for negotiation. When every action is maximal, there is little room to de-escalate. Vlad's governance model left narrow pathways for compromise, and in geopolitics, compromise often determines survival. Mini-recap violence was common in the 15th century. Theatrical violence was less common. Vlad amplified punishment into visual strategy. Spectacle became infrastructure. Fear became policy. And memory became his loudest weapon. But if spectacle built his power, it also built his myth. Because once you become a symbol, you no longer control how you are used. In the next chapter, we confront the final question directly. Did he truly eat his enemies? Or was that accusation the ultimate performance imposed on him? A candle flickers over a handwritten page. The ink describes a feast. A ruler seated calmly. Bodies rising outside the window. Bread dipped into blood. You pause. Is this history? Or is this theatre written in ink? You are there, a scribe at work. It's the late 1460s. You are seated at a wooden desk in a Central European city. The room smells of parchment and animal glue. A pamphlet lies open before you. One of several accounts circulating about Vlad the Impaler. The text describes atrocities, among them a claim that he dined among impaled victims. In some variations, he is said to have dipped bread into blood. In later retellings, this mutates into cannibalism. You sharpen your quill, you copy the story, because stories like this travel, and travel is power. Let's separate layers carefully. Layer 1. Impalement. Multiple independent sources, including Ottoman, German, and later Romanian accounts, confirm Vlad used impalement extensively. This is historically credible. Layer 2. Dining among the impaled. Several hostile pamphlets describe him eating meals while victims suffered nearby. While difficult to verify literally, this motif appears consistently in adversarial sources. It may reflect exaggeration or symbolic amplification of his emotional detachment. Layer 3. Cannibalism. The idea that he consumed human flesh appears primarily in hostile propaganda texts. There is no reliable contemporary administrative record confirming actual cannibalism. Modern historians overwhelmingly treat these claims as defamatory exaggeration. And here's what most people miss. The leap from dining near the dead to eating the dead is small in storytelling terms, especially when the goal is dehumanization. But here's where it becomes psychologically revealing. Accusing a ruler of cannibalism does something specific. It moves him beyond cruelty into monstrosity. In medieval Christian Europe, cannibalism symbolized ultimate moral inversion. It echoed apocalyptic fears. It marked someone as beyond redemption. In other words, if impalement made him terrifying, cannibalism made him mythic. This was character assassination elevated to cosmology. The mid-15th century was a transitional media moment. The printing press allowed pamphlets to spread across German-speaking lands quickly. Sensational stories sold. Merchants who had economic disputes with Vlad had motive to amplify negative portrayals. Political rivals had incentive to circulate damaging narratives. And audiences, already fascinated by frontier violence and Ottoman expansion, were primed to believe extremes. Now picture a modern equivalent, a political opponent accused not merely of corruption, but of something so grotesque it dominates headlines. The accusation alone reshapes perception, regardless of proof. Reputation becomes detached from evidence. There is also a deeper layer. To accuse someone of eating enemies symbolically suggests he consumes opposition, he absorbs power, he thrives on destruction. It transforms a political adversary into a predator. This symbolism later dovetailed perfectly with vampire mythology. A blood-drinking count required only a small imaginative step from blood-dipping propaganda. The narrative groundwork had already been laid centuries earlier. Consider how modern media ecosystems escalate language. A tough negotiator becomes ruthless. A ruthless leader becomes inhuman. Inhuman becomes monster. Hyperbole escalates gradually. Each step feels small. The end result feels enormous. In Vlad's case, the escalation from impalement to cannibalism followed this same rhetorical slope. And once embedded in public consciousness, it rarely reverses, because it aligned with existing imagery. If a ruler is already known for surrounding himself with impaled bodies, imagining him eating among them is not a dramatic stretch for the audience. Belief often follows narrative coherence, not forensic proof. The cannibalism accusation fit the emotional arc. It completed the horror. And in a world anxious about invasion and instability, horror stories provided clarity. Monsters are easier to process than complex rulers. So, did Vlad eat his enemies? Based on surviving evidence, there is no reliable proof that he practiced literal cannibalism. The claim appears rooted in hostile propaganda. But did he cultivate an image of emotional detachment so extreme that such accusations felt plausible? Yes, and that plausibility is historically significant because it reveals how effective his performance of terror was. When cruelty is theatrical enough, myth requires little effort. Impalement, historically attested. Dining among victims, debated but repeatedly described in hostile texts. Cannibalism, almost certainly propagandistic exaggeration. The emperor who ate his enemies is a metaphor amplified into memory. And yet, metaphors shape reality. Now we've stripped away the vampire. We've examined the propaganda. We've compared him to his world. Only one question remains. If he was neither supernatural monster nor simple tyrant, what exactly was he? And what does his story reveal about power, then and now? A skull on a distant table, a head displayed far from home, or perhaps a body buried quietly in monastery earth. No one agrees, and in that uncertainty, legend breathes. The battlefield has gone quiet. Snow begins to fall, light at first, then steady. Boot prints fill with white. Somewhere among the fallen lies Vlad the Impaler. The year is 1476. His final return to the Wallachian throne has lasted only weeks, perhaps months. Details fracture here. Some chronicles suggest he was killed fighting Ottoman-backed forces near Bucharest. Others imply confusion in combat. Even the possibility that he was struck down accidentally by his own men. The records are thin. Medieval documentation rarely offers cinematic closure. One persistent account claims his severed head was sent to Constantinople and presented to Mehmed II as proof of death. Displaying the heads of defeated rivals was not unusual in the 15th century. Across cultures, it signaled finality, dominance, closure. Yet even this detail cannot be confirmed with absolute certainty. Historians rely on later chroniclers, some removed by decades. And here's what most people miss. Uncertainty is fertile ground for myth. When a body is unseen, or burial disputed, narrative fills the gap. Tradition long held that Vlad was buried at Snagov Monastery, on an island north of Bucharest. In the 20th century, archaeological investigations complicated that claim. No definitive remains were identified. Other theories place burial elsewhere. The absence of confirmed remains invites speculation, and speculation feeds endurance. A ruler whose body cannot be firmly located becomes, symbolically, uncontained. It is almost poetic that the man later associated with undead immortality leaves behind ambiguous physical evidence. But ambiguity does not equal supernatural survival. It reflects the archival fragility of the 15th century. But here's where memory becomes even more revealing. After his death, Wallachia did not collapse into permanent chaos. It continued, negotiating tribute with the Ottoman Empire, balancing regional pressures, adapting. Vlad's extreme defiance had not permanently altered geopolitical realities. What it altered was narrative. His reign became a story told in multiple directions. In German lands, a cautionary tale of cruelty. In parts of Eastern Europe, a symbol of resistance. In literature, centuries later, a vessel for Gothic fear. The afterlife of his reputation outpaced the impact of his policies. Think of modern leaders whose immediate political outcomes fade, but whose image endures. Some are remembered not for legislation, but for moments. A speech, a scandal, a photograph. Iconic imagery compresses complexity. Vlad's forest of stakes became that image, not his administrative reforms, not his trade policies. The spectacle survived because it sits at the intersection of universal tensions: small state versus empire order versus freedom, faith versus survival, fear versus stability. These tensions repeat across centuries, and Vlad's life dramatizes them in extreme form. He becomes a mirror. Each generation sees its own anxieties reflected. Victorians saw aristocratic predation. 20th century nationalists saw defiant sovereignty. Modern audiences see psychological complexity and media manipulation. We've watched it unfold for hours now, from the Ottoman court to Târgoviște, from printing presses to Victorian novels. And through it all, power doesn't whisper, it performs. Vlad performed power through spectacle. Pamphleteers performed outrage through exaggeration. Novelists performed fear through fiction. Every layer built upon the last. A final battle. A disputed burial. A head possibly displayed in Constantinople. Wallachia moves on. The man dies. The myth accelerates. So now, after 5 hours in this world of wood and ink and snow and blood-tinged rumour, we arrive at the final question. What does the story of the so-called emperor who ate his enemies reveal about us? About how societies justify cruelty? About how fear stabilizes power? About why monsters are easier to remember than systems? A long wooden table. Candles burn low. Outside, the wind moves through trees. No bodies, no stakes, no empire marching. Just silence, and a question lingering in the dark. Why are we still telling this story? It is neither 1462 nor 1476. It is now. You stand in the old capital of Wallachia, Târgoviște, where fragments of princely courts remain. The air is quiet. Tourists move softly across stone foundations. Information plaques summarize centuries in a paragraph. The stakes are gone. The empire is gone. The prince is gone. What remains is narrative. And here's what most people miss. History does not preserve the loudest rulers. It preserves the most symbolically efficient ones. Vlad the Impaler endures because he occupies a perfect narrative intersection. A small state resisting a vast empire. A ruler using terror as policy. A name that linguistically drifts from dragon to devil. Early print propaganda, amplifying extremes. Later Gothic fiction immortalizing the image. Each layer reinforces the next. Strip away the vampire, and the political drama remains. Strip away the politics, and the psychological drama remains. Strip away the psychology, and the symbol remains. That durability is rare. Did he eat his enemies? Almost certainly not in the literal sense, but metaphorically. He consumed opposition through spectacle. He devoured dissent by making consequences unforgettable. He ingested rebellion into narrative, and the world, in turn, consumed him. As pamphlet, as villain, as vampire, as national hero, as YouTube documentary. But here's where it becomes personal. When we recoil from Vlad's brutality, we must also ask, what forms of spectacle do we accept today? Public shaming, media trials, viral humiliation, political theatre designed to intimidate, different tools, similar logic. Fear still stabilizes, spectacle still communicates, power still performs. The methods evolve, the psychology persists. Consider how modern states broadcast strength. Military parades, mass surveillance announcements, public crackdowns, or how corporations stage visible firings during scandal, or how influencers manufacture controversy to dominate attention cycles. The mechanism is ancient. Visibility creates authority. Intensity creates memory. Vlad's stakes were wooden. Ours are digital. Return to 15th century Wallachia. Imagine living between empires. Invasion a constant possibility. Elites disloyal. Resources limited. Would you prefer a cautious diplomat or a ruler whose enemies hesitate before advancing? For many contemporaries, cruelty could be reframed as protection. Fear could be reframed as order. Stability, even harsh stability, could feel like mercy compared to chaos. Understanding that logic does not excuse it, but it explains it. An explanation is the historian's task. At the beginning of this journey, we sat at a table, candles flickering, bodies outside, a ruler eating calmly. Shock drew us in. Context complicated it. Myth distorted it. Reflection reframed it. What remains is not horror, but awareness. Across 5 hours, through empire and imprisonment, pamphlet and novel. Power doesn't whisper, it performs. And when performance becomes extreme enough, it echoes long after the stage is empty. The architecture of spectacle remains intact. The emperor who ate his enemies was not a supernatural creature. He was a human ruler navigating a brutal frontier. He made choices, some strategic, some severe, some morally unsettling even by the standards of his time. His enemies exaggerated him. Writers reinvented him. Nations reinterpreted him. But beneath every layer lies a timeless truth. Societies under pressure will justify extraordinary measures, and later generations will debate whether those measures were defense or dissent. If this deep, slow burn exploration stayed with you, if you prefer history that lingers rather than shouts, consider subscribing. Next, we'll step into another moment where myth and power intertwine. A ruler whose image was carved into stone while his empire quietly fractured. Until then, reflect on this. When does protection become performance? And when does performance become something we can no longer control?